Lovely. Okay. So I'm very pleased and happy to introduce Asma. She is the CEO and founder of You Make It, which is an organization which delivers human-centered programs to empower young, unemployed, and underemployed Black and Brown women to access the social, cultural, and economic life in their city. So, Asma, straight over, what do you do and why do you do it?
Sorry, Asma, you're on
I
mute.
am on mute. Yes, it is a very, very common mistake with online existence. So sorry about that. Thank you very much, Natalie, for that introduction. And it's really nice to be here with everyone today. Um, as Natalie says, I am the founder and chief executive of You Make It, which is a race and class and gender inclusion organization based in the East End of London. And we run a really powerful holistic empowerment program for young unemployed and underemployed working class majority Black and Asian women, majority from the East End of London. That includes access to a number of services and the things that I think women like me, as a younger version of myself, need to access to become more confident, more entitled, connected, knowledgeable, and experienced in order to live happier lives in their city. And we say their city, I mean London, which is, of course, a really fantastically diverse city, but it's also one with continued and increasing gaps between rich and poor, Black and white. I'm going to very quickly describe our programs for young women. We run them back to back in the East End of London. We work with 75 women a year in a very holistic way, meaning that women don't just access straightforward skills and experiences and knowledge relevant to getting a job or setting up a business and becoming financially independent. They also access one-to-one therapy, pastoral care, wellness activities, because we understand very clearly that actually, if you are from specific backgrounds where you've maybe experienced racial trauma, the trauma related to poverty and intergenerational poverty, and the trauma related to being a woman, that actually often your mental health suffers as well. So very, very purposefully, we have created a really great package of support for women to work on themselves from the inside out. And the reason that we do this and the reason that I set this up is because, yeah, I'm a middle class woman now, but I was raised on a Peckham Council estate in the 70s and 80s by my late single immigrant mother from Pakistan, who in London, with four girls under the age of 6, me being the youngest, 6 months old, ran away from a really violent man and had to build her life and I guess save our lives by running away. And so my experience of life in London very, very early on is that we experienced early years poverty and homelessness, and really, really struggled. And if we think back to, I don't know how old everyone is. I'm 50, but growing up for me was really difficult because we didn't just experience poverty and other bad things that can happen to women. Obviously, we also experienced a lot of racism. The NF was really vibrant. And I think all of those experiences combined to make me a very unconfident person. And I didn't have a good sense of entitlement. And I did have low self-esteem. So although I left school with some patchy GCSEs, it wasn't safe for me to be at school because it was so racist. And I truanted a lot and then didn't even get very good A-level results. I did manage nonetheless to get to university and then, access quite middle class white spaces in terms of my professional life. But I was never really treated very well in those spaces. We talk about the gender pay gap. What about the ethnic pay gap? When you're like experiencing intersectional oppression, there are so many things that you have to overcome and face. So a really big part of wanting to set this program up was because I really do see the world through the lens of someone raised on an estate and who's been marginalized and has been kept out of opportunities or treated really badly. It doesn't take much for me to really empathize Oh, hello, just disappeared for a second. Um, with the women that we work with. And then two other reasons. So as well as the personal lived experience, and me really wanting to reach out to women who are earlier on in their career so they wouldn't have to experience all the things that I'd experienced in the workplace and all the struggles. Um, it was also 2011 was the beginning of austerity, and it was very, very clear to me with the new coalition government, as it was back then, Lib Dem Conservatives, that actually women like me, young iterations of myself, really risk falling through the gaps. And I was worried. I was worried about what happens to women if they are not given the support that they need to really understand, recognize, and achieve their full potential. And then a third reason as to why I set You Make It Up was because although 0 to 18, I lived in Peckham on a council estate. My adult life was spent living in Bethnal Green, which is where I still live. And I had witnessed I think, really devastating results of gentrification. I saw actually that there are all these new opportunities and hip people coming into the area, but there was very little regard for the people who'd been living there before, who didn't have all that class confidence and entry into creative jobs and all the rest of it, or the money for the lattes. And I really do liken gentrification to some kind of, it's quite colonial in a way, the way that, these changes happen and displace local communities. So one part of what my program does is we purposefully have lots of activities that rotate around cultural, creative, and city venues to encourage women to claim a right to their city. So those are the reasons, three really powerful reasons: political, social, personal, lived experience. And that is why I do what I do. And then there's another thing that we began to do in 2020, which was, there was that moment, wasn't there? There was this moment of pause and reflection, seemingly, by people in the wake of George Floyd being murdered and Black Lives Matter. And I did at that point think, well, we're on the ground, we understand racism. So we developed an anti-racism allyship program called You Change It, which we delivered to a number of employers across 18 months. It's not a comfortable program. Racism isn't, so why would it be? It's also a really challenging program, but in a safe space. And so we did that as well. But unfortunately, the appetite for what we experience, the appetite for employers looking at themselves, their whiteness, and microaggressions and how they can do things differently, the appetite for that dwindled amongst employers. So that's been sort of put on hold a little bit at the moment.
Thank you, Asma. I think I can speak on behalf of everybody to say that we're really grateful for the work that you do, and it sounds like You Make It as an incredible organisation doing such important work. So what's your experience of running an organisation as somebody with multiple protected characteristics?
Well, it is really, really different from being somebody who doesn't have protected characteristics or multiple protected characteristics. So I would say that one of the big challenges for me in 2011 is that although I had huge credibility, right, because I'd been working middle management, learned loads of project management skills, etc., from all those places of work that did not treat me well. In addition to that, I also obviously have lived experience. So I'm the expert in this, right? I have the practical work skills and I have the lived experience, the passion, the crazy passion, actually, for trying to do something to make things a bit fairer. Nonetheless, I, as a brown woman, had to kind of prove my concept before I was funded. So my first pilot was put together through self-financing, juggling lots of other paid freelance work, pulling in as many favors as possible to kind of come up with a solution and deliver a solution, and then go to funders and say, look, it works, I'm credible. And I think that's really unfair, because I remember actually, even in my first co-working space that I finally accessed, there were all these Oxbridge Teach First kind of organizations who had come up with their own ideas to look at, unemployment amongst young people. And they didn't have to build it first. They just were completely trusted in. and got like won loads of contracts and loads of funding. So I think that's one of the first things that I experienced that I think is really unfair. I think I have to work my applications for funding, I think, have to be off the scale brilliant to get the investment because my name is Asma Shah. And I just think that's true. I honestly, it's the same as when we apply for jobs, right? We have to make sure our applications are not just good, they are flipping excellent. So I think I have to work really, really, really hard to make sure that every word, no words can just be average that comes out of my mouth. It all just has to be really brilliant, I think, because I am a brown woman from not an, privileged class. I'm not Rishi Sunak, right? I'm a Muslim Pakistani woman who just like has to make sure that everything is really, really good all the time. And that can be exhausting. It can just be really, really exhausting. So one of the other challenges would be that, God, man, there's been burnout across these 13 years, right? But I have to keep at it. When COVID struck, other charities, I am pretty certain took a pause. But I knew if we took a pause, we would probably disappear, right? As well as I wanted to continue during COVID. Because if you're working with marginalized women who suffer from anxiety and depression through no fault of their own, just because the world is unfair and treats them badly, in COVID, they would need us even more. So, of course, I wanted to continue during COVID and to quickly pivot my services and become an online offering. But at the same time, I've just like, I also knew we have to keep going because otherwise we'll disappear. I knew that if I was to tell the story to funders, we continued during COVID, even at the expense of my own mental health and well-being, etc., etc. They would be like, yeah, okay, we're going to keep going with this one. We'll keep supporting. So I think that's one of the other challenges. And then if I'm completely frank with you, I have some really fantastic funder relationships now. City Bridge obviously being one of them. But historically, in those early years, even after I'd proved my concept with my pilot, I did have several meetings with white middle class funders, one man in particular, not going to name him, not going to name the funder. But, I have those meetings, and even those meetings included microaggressions and dismissiveness. And, I remember this one very specific instance talking to a white middle class, middle-aged funder who I think had worked in that funder for probably his whole career with no lived experience, actually, relatable to the people that they're meant to fund to get work off the ground to, remedy the social injustices, the racial injustices of a colonizing country. And I remember having this meeting with him and told him about the pilot. The pilot was evaluated. It was a brilliant pilot. It worked, as do all our programs, because I'm so passionate about what we do. And instead of congratulating me and saying, well done, you took action, you're an activist, you did what a lot of people might not do, he actually said, it sounds like a vanity project to me. Because I was talking about a program that I had created from lived experience, he saw that as a vanity project. And actually, if I was to reflect on my career pre-You Make It and during You Make It, those instances where I have been made to not feel good about what I do, they don't actually kill me. They just keep me going with more and more strength and more determination. So, yeah, microaggressions from funders, dismissiveness. I'm good at writing bids. I'm pretty good at it. I understand how that world works. I've worked in a funder. I understand my work. I understand how to advocate it, and I have my fire in my belly. So I'm still here and I keep going, but I do think back to some of those meetings, some of those conversations, and I just think that's not fair. It's not fair.
It's not at all. And I know that you're an organization run by people with relatable lived experiences to the women that you work with. How do you make sure that you take care of yourself now and your staff to make sure that they don't experience that burnout that you speak about, that you've experienced in the past?
So I want to start, but I don't know how many founders are in this online room, but I do think that when you're the founder of an organization that you have created because of your own lived experiences and your reckoning with what has been really unfair and really wanting to change it for other people, I think that your passion and your determination is so bonkers at times that you can really overlook looking after yourself. And I am really, really guilty of that across 13 years. So I'm going to get onto how we've now got it right, but I do want to, I'm not, definitely that didn't happen for many years. So when I talk about, I've been running You Make It for 13 years, that has been through half of those years were 6 years of IVF and failed miscarriage, right? And many other challenges, but I would just keep on going. I would work through burnout. And I think that's obviously ridiculous, right? So at some point, I think probably during COVID, so not for a super long time, it was during COVID, I had a conversation, interestingly enough, with a male friend of mine who comes from a more entrepreneurial background, more privileged, actually, in many, many ways. And he said to me, I don't think you're being very well looked after. And we discussed some of the ideas that I could pitch to my board to better look after me and better look after I mean, I'm very good at looking after my team. I think it's often a case that I'm kind of so keeping going, a pretty strong person. I think people sometimes don't think I need as much care as I do. So probably during COVID, if I think back to it, and from that conversation I had with a friend who put Maria up to me to say, what's going on here? We introduced, I'm really sorry, there are some dogs barking in the background. I hope you can still hear me. We introduced a number of measures to look after ourselves as women on the front line, including that we have one-to-one therapy. We now have clinical supervision. So anyone working on the front line having disclosures from women who often disclose really painful things that relate to our own lived experience. We have clinical supervision to support us in that area. We also now have a wellness budget. So staff can access a budget to cover the costs of gym or any other wellness activity that makes them feel better. We have also introduced, because we do generate some earned income, we've also introduced a bonus scheme. So although we're a really small charity, at trustee discretion, based on how much income we generate, there is a bonus scheme that staff benefit from. We obviously, off the back of COVID and all working remotely from our living rooms, know that we can still work even if we're not in the office. So we have, an option of home working as well. Although I would argue, actually, my perspective is that community is everything. And I think it's really important to come into the office and to be with those other women who are all behind the same mission. I think nothing can really replace that one-to-one, face-to-face contact. Flexible working, therapy and a wellness budget, and just really checking in with each other. Like, I do not want an organization that's all about, let's encourage women on these programs to, support each other and have this kind of solidarity and care and support, but that's not replicated amongst the team itself. So I would say we've got it right, actually, with our wellness and support for us as an organization and a staff team now. But I think for a long time, we just ignored it. I ignored it because I was ignoring it in myself, but really supporting my colleagues.
Yeah. I mean, as that phrase goes, you can't pour from an empty cup. So it's so important to look after yourselves and your staff. Last question briefly. You touched on generating earned income. Can you just touch on that a bit more on how you went about that? And because I know one of our questions was, how comfortable do people feel with the idea of generating it? So can you tell us a little bit more about
I feel
that?
really comfortable with it. And it's really interesting, actually, because it was some years ago with a former iteration of a board that was much more establishment figures. I just want to say, actually, I thought when I set this up, because I'd worked for quite establishment organizations, that I needed establishment figures on my board. I didn't. I just needed people who had the time and capacity and passion to really support what we were doing. So yeah, anyway, some of those establishment figures found it kind of bonkers that I wanted to sell mentor training in order to bring mentors onto the program. They thought, oh, but they're volunteering and it's also, you know, they're doing such, you know, they just saw things in a very like old-fashioned way, like almost like this is benevolence, when we know that mentoring, yes, it's about goodwill, wanting to support someone, but it's also very much about developing your skill set. So there was a little bit of pushback and discomfort amongst the old iteration of my board, quite traditional establishment people, thinking, why would volunteers pay? But I'm very clear that mentoring is a two-way street. I'm very clear that mentors get a heck of a lot out of it. So I'm really comfortable with that charge, actually. And I was really comfortable with increasing the charge over a number of years. I think that, you know, the anti-racism allyship program that I devised or led on the design of, that was facilitated, is facilitated, because we, you know, we are still doing it, but not as much, by myself with lived experience and other Black and brown people with lived experience. I think it's completely right that that is charged for. I mean, why should we do that for free? The emotional toll on us is insane. We shouldn't even have to exist as an organization, but we do because of structural racism, institutional racism, and the history of the UK and its failure to dismantle racism and the impact of that on the diaspora from formerly colonized countries. So I'm very comfortable actually with pitching ideas and pushing them that generate earned income. And I don't think we would be here, by the way. We all know as charities, we have to establish some healthy reserves. And we have healthy reserves, but I don't think they'd be very healthy, actually, if there weren't moments across the journey of the 13 years where I thought about, okay, we can't just be grant dependent. We also have to generate earned income through ways that absolutely tie to our mission. So it's not about generating earned income that's like not connected. It's all very connected. But yeah, I'm comfortable and I'm really comfortable. You know, I don't come from a commercial background. I have got some friends who come from a commercial background, and I ask people for as much advice as possible around, you know, the development, the price points, and any of the things that I don't know. I just ask for help far and wide. And largely I get given it.
Thank you. James just wrote in the chat, too many things in this sector are weighed down by the lens of charity as opposed to rights, which is really true.
Absolutely. I cannot, this is about social justice. Everything that I imagine everyone is doing in this call is about social justice. And, you know, that word charity is triggering, even to me, by the way, because I'm like, hang on, this is a bit about, what's the word? Reparations, right? It's like justice. So the word charity is annoying. And I wasn't a charity all the time, by the way. I was a not-for-profit, 2014, became a registered charity. But I really get that. I really understand it. And I empathize with how the word charity and the concept of charity is irksome, especially those with lived experiences.
Thank you so much. I'd just like to open the floor now to anybody else that might have a question. Please feel free to put your hand up, your virtual hand, or just call out or put it in the chat. Yeah, any questions? Oh, Emma has raised her hand.
Thanks. Sorry. Hi, Asma. Yeah, I was just wondering kind of if you had the ability to sort of send yourself back a time capsule to when you started, what would you put in it? What would be those like kind of key like things you know now, or what would you send back?
I would maybe have tried to find somebody to do this with me. I mean, it was hard. 2011 to 2016, it was me. I had a little bit of part-time fun, 2 days a week, admin support at various points. But it wasn't until 2016 that I got enough funding, like enough funding to recruit some full-time staff. So I think for me, one of the things would have been, could I find somebody to do this with me? I think a founder's journey is really, it is a bit mad, right? Because I also know that you know, when you really are walking in your mission or whatever it is, and like there's just this momentum, like I think I probably couldn't have done it any other way because I was just on this mission. Like I couldn't even, I just knew it's something I'm doing and I have to do it. So it's quite hard to think about what I would have changed or done differently because I was just in this like impatient, like I need to do something. But yeah, I think if you can find people to do it with so that the responsibility and the everything is a little bit more like distributed between you and another person, might have done that.
Thank you. James, please.
Hi, Asma. Thanks for coming to talk to us today. I've got one selfish question from the perspective of funders, and then a kind of follow-up to that, which hopefully is helpful for everyone on the call. So you talked about some of the funding relationships that you'd had in the past, and I just wonder if you could share a bit more with us about what you think makes a really good funding relationship. What are the strong relationship, and then sort of help hopefully more helpful for everyone else on the call, you know, any advice you might have for people about navigating those funding relationships and making sure they work for you.
So thank you, James, and hello, because I know we also share some other space, another forum. So I want to start by saying that my first real funder was and is a Black working class man who worked for the Esme Fairbairn Foundation. He's now running 10 years' time. Brilliant man, Dirk Bardell. He had a 2.5 hour long human conversation with me about my upbringing, my passion, my thoughts, my feelings about the world. And that to me was the most interesting and brilliant way of assessing whether a person who ran an organization was worth investing in. So I think that and actually I had a similar experience. I did actually apply first off to City Bridge, but then it was followed up by another really humanistic conversation with Abby, which I again really, really appreciated. So I think what funders need to do is cut the initial paperwork, maybe, and perhaps start by having a conversation with the person with the idea. I think that is really, really important. You know, they say that, right? With businesses, you know, investors are investing. Yeah, it's the idea, but it's very much the person behind the idea. So I think funders really need to move towards that. And I think in terms of maintaining a good relationship with a funder, it's obviously, you know, it's just keeping in touch with them, inviting them to key events, encouraging them to come along. Funders can't always do it, you know, they're funding like hundreds and hundreds of things. But I think if you've struck up enough of a conversation, a relationship, a rapport, just a human, authentic exchange, they're more likely to pitch up to an event. I know it's not always possible, but I think that is really, really important. Yeah, funders should start with conversations, with knowing the person. It breaks my heart a bit, right? Because I know that there are lots and lots of organizations who and projects and people who've got brilliant ideas, but they may not necessarily have the capacity or the experience to be able to navigate all those complex forms. And I find that a bit appalling. And does that answer the question?
That does, yeah, thank you. And I agree with you on all of that. Yeah, I very much want this to be a piece that helps others to better understand how to navigate all those, as you mentioned, the complexities and the issues around capacity. It's not always easy to do. There's no silver bullet.
There isn't. But what I would also say is really, really importantly, with successful bids that may not have involved, you know, those really long face-to-face meetings as a start, right? You can't always get them. Always, if you are completing an application form and there's a question you don't understand, sometimes it's because the question has not been thought through and the funder's got it wrong and they don't know what they're writing. I'm just being really honest. Make sure you get in touch with that funder. There's always someone you can speak to, right? It might not be a grants manager, but it'll be somebody. Make sure you speak to them and get assistance where you can to understand what they're asking. I think that's really, really, really important. Never take it for granted that if you don't understand something that's being asked, it's because it's on you. Sometimes it's on the actual, especially when you apply to, if there's corporate grants, and sometimes they asking for nonsense. So I would also say that.